Thank you, Ray. Good morning, everyone. Just as a matter of illustration, the question about recordings being available, you can now see that we've got the recording for sessions 1 and 2 so far, and you can see that this link for today's session that will be coming a little bit later. So I did just want to be pointing out that particular thing. Okay, so I'm going to get into things immediately in analytics. And just going to increase the font size a little bit to make things a little bit easier to use. Just a note here with regard to the environment that I'm in. This environment has been updated to show the new layout. This is something that is going to be coming, and so just be aware that while it looks a little bit different, everything else there is the same as we would be expecting it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and open analytics and get started with the presentation. Before I actually get started with the first analysis, I did want to point out one thing, and that is that Dominic and I are saving all of these analyses to the shared folder space under Community, and then going to Reports, Shared Reports, and then finally to the Knowledge Days 2020. And so the resource management examples, Dominic had placed them there last week. I placed the acquisitions examples here earlier today, so they are available in North America at this point. I believe that you'll all be able to get access to them, although there is also a data synchronization piece that does occur, and so if you would be joining this session from a region where the data center is perhaps in Europe or Middle East or wherever, that synchronization may not yet have occurred. And so just be aware that it may take a little bit of time before you're going to be able to see the exact examples there. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and actually start brand new. And what I want to do is begin with an analysis that focuses on cost changes of subscriptions. And the whole point being is that this is something that we need to do on a regular basis, that we need to be just monitoring what are the cost changes. Are we paying more this year? Are we paying less this year? What sorts of things are going on? And intentionally, I'm going to be focusing on a 2-year range so that we can actually even see a percentage difference, so that we're either paying more or less and what that difference is. So for our purposes, I'm going to go and I'm going to select the funds expenditure subject area. And so we have come to this spot, and again, I'm going to just increase the font size a little bit to make it a little more comfortable to view. And I'm going to begin by adding in 3 columns, and these 3 columns, starting with the fiscal period description, and then going down to get in some title information. And so from the bibliographic details, I'm going to select title. And then the last column that I want to add at this point is going to come from the fund transactions area. And it's going to be, and you can see here that in addition to transaction amount, that there now are columns of data where some math has been applied underneath. So for example, that we would be able to now have something that is filtered so that it's looking only at the expenditure amount. We of course also have things here for allocation and encumbrance and other sorts of things, as well as things on the basis of the type of format the items are. And so there's lots of interesting ways for us to be able to work with those sorts of things. And I'll add in that particular column. If we go and take a look at the results at this point, of course, I'm in a relatively small environment, so it's going to be returning results pretty quickly. We get to see information coming back. We've got some situations where there are some empty fields, and well, I'm not going to be too concerned about those right now because these are really old things that we're looking at. Now that I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to place this information into my institution's report folder. My institution is known as Clean Training. Your institutions will all be known by your institution's names, and so it could be, just knowing some of the people who are participating in today's session. We could be reading Mercer University. We could be reading University of Pittsburgh. We could be reading Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. So there are lots of different sorts of things that we could be seeing here. But Clean Training is the institution that I'm working in, and I want to go to this particular reports area. And there you can see also that I happen to have this Knowledge Days folder. So I'm going to go ahead and just put my analyses into that acquisitions folder. And so just opening it up a little bit more again and getting to this particular point. Okay, and there looks like I've got something already in place. I'm going to go ahead and just overwrite that particular one and continue on. So from here, then, we are able to see that we have the start of information. Of course, what we really want to be seeing is things in connection with probably, like the cost changes between the 2019 fiscal year and the 2020 fiscal year. So in order to work on that, I'm going to go back to the Criteria tab. And the very first thing that I want to apply in all of this is what kind of purchase order line information are we looking for? And so since this is about subscriptions, we're looking at something called continuity. So I'm going to add the filter. And so what this is going to do is apply the filter to the analysis without showing the column of data. So I go to the More Columns area. And from here, I'm going to open up the PO line type folder and select from here continuity. And so this is a way then in which I am able to make my choice. And in this case, because subscriptions are continuous, this is the one that I'm looking for. So I make that particular selection and I click on OK. So that now has added that particular filter and gives us a reduced list of things that we would be looking at. Another filter that I want to apply in this particular case, and this time I'm going to actually use this from the fiscal period description column, is again to apply a filter. And in this particular case, I'm going to say, and here I'm scrolling down to choose the FY 2019, FY 2020. In your own environments, this particular, the label that you have here, this is something actually that comes out of Alma. It's in the fiscal period description area, really in configuration, where we're able to say, so this might actually be an FY-2019. It might be an FY19. It all depends on how you've got that set at your institution. So now I have my two fiscal periods descriptions in place, and I click on OK. And I'm just going to go ahead and actually do one more thing. And so this is a third filter that I want to put in place. The purpose of which is to say these are now going to be active PO lines, active things that we're working with, so that we're not looking at things where we have canceled a subscription. So in this example, again, I'm going to go back to my funnel in order to add another filter, and this time, and so more columns, this time going out to the PO line folder and selecting from it status. Now you can see that there are two things here. We've got status and status active. The status active is more detailed. It gives us things along the lines of waiting for renewal, waiting for invoice, and so we're seeing more precise kinds of things in connection with various things that are going on with purchase order lines. In this example, though, where we're looking at status, now we're talking about, and if I select that, is the purchase order line active, canceled, or closed? And so in this example, it's going to be active. So I've now got these three filters in place. I'm going to save the changes and then take a look at the results. So we begin to see information that is current or reasonably current. We see that we've got titles that have got values in them and are associated with a specific fiscal period. If I scroll down, we'll also be able to see there is my fiscal year 2020. And so we're seeing some of those, we're seeing those same kinds of titles in place. One or two new things that have been included, and so just being able to see what all of those items are. So at this point, okay, it's okay. We've got a good analysis to be looking at, but then we need we want to actually get some comparison kinds of things going on, and to do that, I'm going to change the view of this analysis, and the view in this particular case is that I want to get rid of the table, but instead look at a pivot table, because with a pivot table, I can manipulate how the information appears just a little bit differently. And so I'm going to begin by going up to the menu here, and if I hover over it, you can see the menu is described as a new view. And if I click on it, one of the things I can choose there is pivot table. And so when I select this, there's now going to be, in fact, a pivot table appearing here below in the analysis. And so we've now got both the table and the pivot table. Well, since I really don't care so much about the view for the table, I'm actually going to delete the table. Now, I can always get it back. The data is there, and if I wanted to again have a table, all I'd need to do is go back to the new view and choose table. It would appear then below, and we're able to then again go back to where we were, where we might be happiest in terms of what we're looking at. The change, though, that occurred in this particular case is that we're now seeing that we, in fact, A, have our pivot table, B, that we have our fiscal years appearing here, and that we're able to then be seeing comparison of what did we spend in 2019, what are we spending in 2020, so that's one thing, but then also seeing cost changes from one year to the next for individual titles. And so where we see the advances in natural science, that in 2019 the cost was 5,610, and that we now have 5,891 in the 2020 fiscal year. So we're now actually seeing those kinds of things. One or two other things that we might do here, and again, just a save on the analysis. One thing that you will see me do a lot is I'll make one or two changes and then save the analysis. There is nothing more frustrating than if suddenly there's a network failure at your campus, or just the internet goes down generally, to then lose all of the work. And so save early, save often, and I think you're going to feel it's a better approach all the way around. So I'm going to go back to the criteria tab, and to do one thing is that right now we're seeing rounded dollar values. And for some people, that's may not be just as comfortable as they would like it to be. So instead, I'm going to go over to the criteria tab, and I'm going to make a change to the data presentation through the column properties area. And in doing this, then I'm going to go to the data format, and I'm going to say override the default data format, and rather than treating the numbers as numbers, treat them as currency. And then I can, if I want, I can include a currency symbol, and I can decide whether or not I want to use a thousands separator. So I click on OK. Make that change, and then now we'll see the exact dollar values that are in place. In some cases, there was no difference. It was already a full dollar value. In other cases, we're seeing that rather than having $75, which was a moment ago, that it's 74.68 in this particular case. So that's giving us that sort of thing. Now, if I want to be seeing things like the percentage difference, this is a case where I'm going to go back to the criteria tab, and I'm going to add another instance of this transaction expenditure amount. Really, it could be any column, but in this particular case, I'm just going to choose to add this, and then we're going to do some work on it in order to help us get that percentage. So right now, among the first things that you see is that, of course, that it's got exactly the same label. So the very first thing I like to do, just as a way of reminding me what we're working on, is that we want to be looking at things in connection with, and here just wanting to get the exact description that I had put in place. On the column format tab, I want to customize this heading, and I just want to say percentage change FY 219 and FY 2020. It's a pretty long column heading, but it just makes it really clear what it is we're trying to accomplish. So, and besides that, it also makes sure that I am then working on the correct column. So we really don't want to be suddenly making a change to this column when in fact that would, while it wouldn't be bad, it would be potentially confusing. So here I'm going to go, and to this column, I want to go ahead and edit the formula. And now we get into doing a little bit of math, and you can see that there's some data that's selected, and so this is the sort of the back end view of what does this column actually look like. And so I want to, in this particular case, I'm going to make sure that it remains selected, and then I'm going to apply a filter to it. And so we can apply an attribute filter to anything at all that is a measure. And so in this particular case, I want to say, now basically show me first off the filter that says, what is the fund expenditure on the basis of which fiscal period description? And so here I'm going to select this, and basically actually a double click to invoke the filter. And I want to say in this particular case that we're going to now choose the FY 2020. And I click on OK and OK again. And then we're able to see that we actually we start getting a more complicated looking formula in place. Then I want to go ahead and this is where we start doing the math. Trying to get percentages sorted. So first off, I'm going to insert a space followed by a minus sign and another space. Now I could use the minus sign that's down here. That's definitely a doable sort of thing. But so what I want to do then from this point is now I want to basically insert this as another or the next fiscal year. And so in this particular case, I'm going to open up this fund transactions area. I'm going to check the fund expenditure amount again. And so selecting it here, using the blue arrow to push it over. It's selected there, and then now I want to go and apply another filter to it. And once again, it's going to be the fiscal period description filter. So a double click. And this time it's going to be the FY 2019 entry. And so, okay, and as you can see, we're kind of building the filter in this way. Our next step after all of this is going to be a space and divide by. And so you can see the slash kind of thing, and we'd be able to take care of those sorts of things. So now that we've got the slash in place, another option for me to do here is, in fact, to use a copy and paste. So I can go ahead and select this. So a copy, and then I'm going to paste this into place. And so it's basically fiscal period 2020 minus fiscal period 2019 divide by fiscal year 2019. We do need to do one or two other kinds of things here in order to make sure that we've got just absolutely everything in place. One of them is that we now need to do a times by 100 in order to, this is all again in aid of getting percent kinds of things. And so here using the times and 100. One more thing to do with this formula, and this is all just making sure that all the math is happening correctly, is that we want to make sure that we're remembering all of the order of actions. And so the very first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to insert a left parentheses here, and I'm going to insert a right parentheses here, so that we are able to actually be seeing the 100%. If we didn't do that, we would be landing up with like 9,800% rather than 98%. And so it just makes it kind of an interesting thing to look at. Clicking on OK. I'm going to, that was quite a lot that we did. And just as a reminder here, just, what does it actually look like there? And, so this would be the kind of thing that you would be able to copy and put into Notepad or other sorts of things for future reference, and then be making adjustments on the basis of any things that would be relevant. So now that I have done that, let's go have a look at the results. Well, there's something that is actually happened here, and it looks a little bit odd. Dominic and I, in fact, have talked about this. Is that the analytics seems to, when we added the second instance of the transaction expenditure amount column, it made an assumption that it should be going into that exact same spot, so that it should live right next to it. Well, we can adjust that. And I'm going to adjust that by going to the layout view. And so I want to go and edit the view. And this is where we're actually able to see that this information, where it's sitting. So there is my transaction expenditure amount. There's my percentage change column. And so the main thing that I want to do with this then is I want to take this, and there you can see it. I hover over the column, I get a four-headed arrow. Then I can pick up that whole column and add it to the rows data. And then we start getting percent information. And so we're seeing that the math is in fact being done correctly. Now, we're still seeing that, you know, we're getting whole values here. So I'm clicking on done basically to say that that's how I want this this particular thing to look. There are a couple of different ways in which I can actually get percentage information. Probably the simplest one is to go back to the criteria tab. And now for this percentage change entry, I'm going to go to the column properties. And once again, on the data format tab, I'm going to override the default data format and say, rather than, or go ahead and let's treat the numbers as percentage. And then I can decide how many decimal places do I want to go to. So if it's going to be 3 or 4, how far do I want to be going in this case? I click on OK. I'm going to save that change, and we then take a look at the results. And then we're able to see really where we've got to. So you can see that we've got an 8.2251% increase for the title Advanced Robotics. That we have an 11.9915% increase for the title Biofabrication. And so that's giving us a way to be able to monitor that. We can also see where we have where we're paying less for a title. And giving us different sorts of things, or where we other kinds of things that we are seeing in this particular case is where we have a title that we didn't have in 2019, that we have only in 2020, and so we see that we land up then with some empty values. There would be some things that we could do. We just say that if it is null, display 0. On the other hand, knowing this kind of thing can then be useful all by itself. Okay, so there an example on getting subscription cost changes. I'm going to go ahead and save that analysis one more time, and before we move on to looking at another example. This example is going to be all about electronic resources activated in the past month. This is kind of a relevant sort of a topic today, given that how students and faculty are getting access to resources has changed quite a bit in recent memory. So we have library liaisons who would like to get a monthly report of electronic resources newly added to the library's collections. And what they're hoping to do with all of this is then to enable an RSS feed via the library homepage to say, you know, by the way, here are new things that have come into the library or have become available to you in the last month. And so with that in mind, I'm going to start a new analysis, this time using the electronic or the e-inventory subject area. And we'll begin by adding in some columns. And the columns, we're going to start off with electronic collection public name. And so just scrolling down to where we find that. And so again, being able to see those there, to see that particular information, I want to also get the electronic collection activation date. So we'll close up that particular folder now, and then I want to add in some things that will give us just an idea about what is it we're looking at, get a title. So we'll include that, and in this case, I'm going to choose title complete. And the last thing that I want to include is then the portfolio activation date. By using portfolio activation date, we're able to see those things that are standalone portfolios, as well as, and I'll just perform an overwrite there, as well as electronic collections. So it's going to give us all of those sorts of details. So now that I have saved this, let's take a look at the results. So at this point, we haven't yet applied that filter that's going to give us that date information, and so we're actually able to see a lot of things, you know, going back a ways. Some things that apparently don't have activation dates in them, but it gives us a way to be able to see what these things are. So I'm going to go back over to the criteria tab, and I want to apply a filter to the portfolio activation date. And in this particular case, so choosing filter from this menu, and for sake of argument, I am going to choose a date. In fact, I'm going to intentionally choose April 1st, 2020. And I'm going to change the operator to say is greater than or equal to, so that we'll be looking at only those things activated since that particular point. And then taking a look at the results. So we're now able to see that we've eliminated any of those older things. What we're looking at now is current information. And so there we have this title, A Honeybee Heart Has 5 Openings. That was activated on Friday. Einstein's War, that was activated middle of last week. And then a few other things that go back just a little bit further. And then a whole bunch of other resources. And in this particular case, where we see this annual reviews, and then all of these different scientific entries. Then if we keep scrolling down, then we get the BearCon journals, and we're able to see what those sorts of things are. And again, when the activations occurred. Save on that, and I'm going to go back over to the criteria tab. And in this case, I want to, you can see where we have this filter already in place, is that it's the greater than or equal to. And I want to now edit this filter. And in editing this filter, what I want to do is actually convert it to SQL. And by converting it to SQL, I'm going to be able to basically give us a rolling interval so that we'll be able to say, so 30 days before today, so basically taking us back to April 11th, what are the things that got activated you know, within that period of time? And then tomorrow, it would be from April 12th and forward, and so on and so forth. So it's always going to be showing us what's the most, you know, what are the things that have been going on in the past, literally month. And so by putting a check in the box here for convert this filter to SQL, when I click on OK, it takes me into a spot where I can now be modifying this particular information. So the thing that I want to do here is I'm going to delete this bit of information here so that I can then add in what's called a timestamp. And here I'm actually going to put on the uppercase function. It's not required. I just find that it's easier to be able to identify when I'm doing this kind of work what it looks like. So I'm going to add in here timestamp add, and then follow that with a left parentheses SQL, so structured query language underscore TSI, and here timestamp interval. And then I'm going to say that this is going to be, that we're going to use day in this example. So now that I've got this in place, and let me just I'm going to just expand this so that we can see the whole of it in one row. Now that I've got that in place, a comma, and then I'm going to say minus 30. So basically, we're going to be looking back 30 days before today. Again, a comma, and then current underscore date. So again, just to reiterate what we have here, we're saying, show me things 30 days before today, anything at all within that 30 days before today. So the current date becomes a very important part of all of this kind of thing. I'll click on OK, and then you can see the updated filter that displays in this particular example. I'm going to save that particular change once again, and let's go take a look at the results. And so now we're seeing, very much the same kind of thing that we were seeing when I had my April 1st entry in place. That we're able to then again see all of these things that are then listed. If there had been anything else, and in fact, if I was to say rather than 30 days, show me instead 15 days or 14 days. So it would be 2 weeks rather than a month, some other kind of an interval, that we are able to get just a different view of it. And so there we're seeing now some of the older things have dropped off the list because they now are outside that particular interval. Okay, now I should actually go back and just adjust this, since the label of it is actually 30 days rather than 15. I did want to point out one other thing to you, is that there is another way that we could have written this timestamp. So I'm just going to copy this. The way we could have done it instead, and I'll actually delete this here in just a moment, is that rather than using day, we could have put in month, in which case we could have said -1. It really depends on what your preference is. There are lots and lots of options that you can be looking at, and in the document that that is provided to you, there are ideas about where you can get timestamp interval information. Basically, any Google search and you look for timestamp add, those sorts of things, it will help with being able to show what the options are, and you can get year and quarter and half year and do all of those kinds of things as well. So there are lots and lots of options when it comes to working with the timestamp. Okay, so they're having now an analysis that we can use in this particular way. Now, of course, we want to then also be able to expose this information in as automated a fashion to wherever the RSS feed is going to be drawing from. And the way that we would do that is through through Alma itself, and going to the analytics menu, choosing the objects list, and being able to add a new Alma analytics object. The very first thing I want to do here is I'm going to choose from this list scheduled report. After that, I'm going to say, where does my analysis live? And so here we're able to see that we've got all kinds of things available. Again, my institution is called Clean Training. So for that reason, I'm going to be going to Clean Training, Reports, Knowledge Days 2020, Acquisitions. And there I can see my electronic resources activated in the past 30 days. I'm going to just use copy and paste to bring that hoping to bring that title in, and it looks like that's not going to happen there. So and just getting that information typed in. Now that I've chosen this to be a scheduled report, then I'm able to identify how I want to have that information sent. So if it's going to be Excel or text, whatever the RSS feed is going to need. In this example, I'm going to use Excel. Then I can go ahead and schedule it, but then I can also set this up so that it's going to automatically go out to an FTP server where it can then be fetched by the RSS feed. And I would say go here to get this information, or put it there so that then the RSS feed knows where it can go. And then I can also be scheduling it to occur every day at 2 a.m. so that it would automatically be updating, and we would always be looking at the past 30 days. So I'm just going to put that in place, and worked on from there. Oh yes, and please select a role. I forgot about that. We would need to make sure that we get some kind of a role involved in being able to see this, whether or not. And so here, I'll just make this an electronic resources operator. Let's see here, get down there to the electronic inventory operator for now, add that role, and then we are able to save that particular that object, making that kind of thing available. Okay. So we've also got, you know, there will come the point, I think, when we are back in the libraries, and perhaps we want to also be able to show something similar, though, but for physical resources, because you know, much as everything is becoming electronic, there are still physical resources that we are using. And so in this example, I'm going to go to new analysis, and this one I'm going to run through pretty quickly, just on account of time. And let's go through a new analysis, and in this case using the physical items subject area. And adding in things like the library unit, and so getting the library name, actually, and then I realized that I'm choosing library unit rather than location, which is the one that I want. So here, getting our library name, our location name. Okay, and then I'm lining up with doubles. Okay, and it looks like the internet is slowing down on me a little bit here. Okay, let's get that location name in there. Again, choosing from bibliographic details that will get some things in connection with title information. And here, using title complete, really this is all about being able to show like most of the 245, and so we're able to use that as a way to put that in. Then choosing out of the holding details a place for us to get the permanent call number. So what call number has actually been applied to this particular title. And then from the physical item details, getting the receiving date. Because when we, that receiving date is something that fills in automatically when we're going through the receiving workbench, and so it gives us that kind of information. So one thing that I do want to include in the also in the analysis is here under the bibliographic details is the material type column, because one thing I want to not have in my list is anything at all related to subscriptions. What we're looking here is for you know, monographic materials and those kinds of things. And so I'm going to apply a filter that says is not equal to journal. I could also say perhaps computer file, you know, these other sorts of things as well. But in this case, let's go with those two things. And then we're going to just save this then as our physical titles received in the past month. And again, I'll go ahead and just overwrite that one. And then we're able to take a look at the results. Now, before going down to that particular spot, right away, I'm going to go ahead and just take care of that, that filter in which we're going to, again, use that sort of same approach that we were looking at in terms of the SQL statement to give us that that timestamp. And so here, choosing the is greater than or equal to, and picking a date. And really, it can be any date that we want. And so here, picking May 1st as our start, then converting it to SQL. And from here, being able to do that same sort of thing, in which we would be looking at information that would give us just a different way to work with this. So once again, in uppercase, getting to our timestamp. Timestamp add, and then let's go from here, and we'll get our SQL TSI month information. And let me just pull this over in order to make it a little bit larger. That we're going to use a -1 in this case from the current underscore date. Now, one other way of looking at this is that rather than saying is greater than or equal to, we could say instead between a month from the current date and current underscore date. So this is another way to do this kind of thing. Both of them work perfectly well. If for any reason we would be missing, for example, a parentheses in one place or another, that this would be the analytics would remind us that we need to be working on this kind of thing. And so from here, then again, being able to go ahead and take a look at the results and seeing what are the things that we have received in that particular interval, and getting, you know, and where they are in the library, what are these things, what are the titles, and then again, this is the same sort of thing. We could possibly we could be including information that would then be published to an RSS feed in exactly the same way that I did with the electronic resources version. So those are the three analyses that I wanted to show you. There is a bonus analysis that's available in the document, and that has to do with being able to create a budget summary. And so being able to go on from there. I'm just seeing a note that's popping up from the in the chat, and just thought about whether or not we can get price information in connection with all of this. Well, we are able to, there's, as you can see here, there's replacement cost. Now, of course, that would mean that information would have to be in place. Rather than that, though, that we would be able to actually get out to the PO line area, and from there be able to actually get the list price. And so if we wanted to see that, now I'm just going to go ahead and add that in, and we'll just say that the list price is going to go there. And so yes, that information can be included. And so it's giving us giving us those details. Okay, Dominic, questions?
Thank you, Connie. Yes, we do have a couple of questions, and just going to start from the top, which was about our first report on subscription cost changes. There was a question about whether the blank line we saw earlier at the top was a sum or just a missing title. information in our environment.
Oh, okay. Yes. So when we're looking at giving that just a second to come up. Yeah, so one thing that I did not do, so where we're seeing this blank line here and we have the minus 31.1961%, because I did not apply a filter for allocated funds only, that's the reason that we're seeing that this is sort of the big values. So the overall expenditures that have occurred, and so they don't apply to a single title in this case. It's what's been going on in the ledger in connection with all of those activities.
And another question about this report. In our example, we looked at fiscal year 2019 and 2020, but there was a question about whether we could specify just the current fiscal year and previous fiscal year so that we don't have to change those filters. I believe that is possible through the fiscal period folder. Connie, can you confirm that?
I think that, let's see here, if we go into the fiscal period folder, let's see.
I think it might be that fiscal period filter field.
Oh, this one here. Okay. And so, so what are you thinking, Dominic?
Oh, I was thinking this might have the current and previous fiscal year as an available filter option.
Okay, let's just see what shows up. Oh yeah, so there we're seeing previous and current. Okay, yeah. So it looks, so right now, of course, we've got kind of duplicating some things on top of each other. Yeah, but it should give us the previous and current. Yeah.
Okay, and another question was why we happen to be using the filter functions as opposed to using a filter for the fiscal year, building that filter function into our percent change, for example.
I have to tell you, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to have to think about that one. Dominic, do you have a thought on that?
I think I would need to do a little bit of research on that one, but I think it may be needed for this case where we have two measures in a single report. In an example that we might be looking at in our fulfillment presentation actually next week, we talk about how finding loans and renewals and having them display side by side can lead to issues. And so using the filter function within a measure like transaction expenditure amount allows you to make sure that those are being calculated separately rather than interacting with each other on the report. We may need to get back to you on that question though.
Other questions, Dominic?
You mentioned that we could feed this into an RSS feed, and there was a question about setting up that RSS feed and viewing it.
Okay, so well, the whole point here with regard to an analysis like this, and then the object that goes along with it, this analytics object, is that so we need to have a place where the RSS feed can go and fetch that particular information. And so likely that's going to be an FTP server. It could be elsewhere, just that in having the FTP server, and this is taking a long time to open up. And so this, so some things there that, working with Discovery in order to be able to get that information to appear I think that if you're looking for more on exact details on how to do that kind of thing, probably a question out to the Discovery Primo list, or if it's someone being able to go to that particular level as well, and checking on what are people doing in order to make these sorts of things available.
And there was another question as well about this report, which is just wanting to see how the percentage change column changed from 2 empty columns into one.
Okay.
When you moved that in the pivot table.
Right. Okay. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to go back to the. Oh, and it looks like I've messed up things here thoroughly. Let me just go back to the layout view. And so here I'm editing the view. And originally when we were seeing this information, and here I'm going to go ahead and just take this. Yeah, the percentage change suddenly has landed up over here. Originally when I arrived here, the 2 columns of data were showing up differently. And so here, let me just take out this fiscal period filter as well. Just put that into so that we're actually able to see things a little bit more normally as to how we were appearing looking at them. And I'm not quite sure what this is doing here. Yeah, some things got moved around there when I was working with it, but then we're landing up with these different columns. And so what I landed up doing was just taking this column for percentage change and shifting it from the measures area to the rows area to get that to then give us the percentage change information. Yeah, some things in here have got really quite messed up as a result of my effort. So let me go ahead, and I'm just going to go ahead and revert here and just see whether or not I can actually bring us back with a better version of this particular analysis. And we'll just say that we're done on it. In fact, I do have the analysis, or let me just go ahead and leave the page for now. I'll come back into this analysis. Leaving the page means that I'm walking away without saving it. And so we can come back and get a better look at it. And so getting back to that particular view of things, whereas earlier, if I had the percentage change that was displaying over here, that's when I was getting those 2 columns. And then once I moved it, it gave us that particular variance right there. Okay.
And it looks like we've had a couple of requests to see the formula that you created for percent change.
Sure, we can go and do that. So the formula that I created, and so here going to edit formula. And so just, in fact, I can go ahead and rebuild this from the sorts of things that are that we've already got. And so beginning by adding in from the fund transaction area, the transaction expenditure amount. So that's the very first thing that I'm going to do. With that selected, then I'm going to apply a filter. And the filter in this particular case is going to be for the fiscal period description. So a double click. And in this case, choosing the FY 2020. So we're taking the current amount. And so there you're able to see the kind of thing that was going on. Then inserting the minus sign, so a space, a minus sign, and a space. Then I'm going to take that column again, so I could use the insert function here, or in place of this, I can just let me make sure that I get the correct amount of it that we're going to get hold of this. So the whole of this copy and paste it here, changing the FY 2020 to the 2019. So now it becomes, so FY 2020 minus FY 2019, so getting the transactions that relate to either of them. Following that with a divide by the entry now again for this information. So the 2019, then times 100. And the very last step in all of this, just to make sure that things are getting grouped together correctly, is to place a left parentheses and a right parentheses so that the math is happening correctly. As I said, and it was a thing that I discovered last week, is that without that last left and right parentheses, I was landing up with percentages like 8100.0032% rather than what I wanted, which was 81%, 81.0032, and so that kind of thing going on there. Okay, Dominic, anything else?
We do have some other questions, but it looks like we're at time.
Okay.
Ray, did you have any closing to mention?
I did get a request if we would put the links from the questions that were brought up today, and I will add those over to the Knowledge Center. So just that link one more time for those of you who are interested. It'll probably not be until tomorrow, but we'll get those up as soon as we can. So thank you all for your attendance, and Connie and Dominic, thank you so much for this really informative presentation. I hope we'll see all of you at more of our Best of Knowledge Days webinar series. Thanks so much.